Hey guys, so this is part 2. I did upload part 1, not really onto YouTube, sort of onto YouTube in a way, but it's unlisted. Basically, people can't watch it unless they have a link. So, yeah. Anyways, let's get back to this. Again, I recommend you have your book out either physically or on Savas website. Page 10, Scientific Methodology. I'm going to be sharing my notes too. Scientific methodology. Is science a mysterious process that only scientists do and under special circumstances? Nope. You use scientific thinking all the time. Suppose your family's car won't start. What do? You use what you know about cars and ask questions. Is the battery dead? You test that idea by turning the key in the ignition. If the starter motor works, but the engine doesn't, you reject the dead battery idea. Is the car out of gas? A glance at the fuel gauge tests that idea. Again and again, you apply scientific thinking until the problem is solved or until you run out of ideas. And call a mechanic. Scientists work in pretty much the same way. There isn't a single cut and dry scientific method, but there is a general style of investigation we call scientific methodology, which is a fancy way of saying the way science works. Scientific methodology includes observing, I recommend you write this down, observing and asking questions, forming hypotheses, conducting controlled experiments, collecting and analyzing data, and drawing conclusions. It basically points to figure 1-2. I recommend you look at that figure. I looked at the figure, but I'm just gonna, oh my lord. I cannot speak. It's late right now. I'm going to skip it and move on. Lord. Anyways. Like I said in part 1, I recommend you write your own notes, and then you go to ChatGPT and also ask the ChatGPT for notes on this, because it's going to help you so much more. I wrote both types of notes, so here I'm going to be reading my notes. I am going to be sharing my notes on Teams, so you can pull that up. Scientific knowledge is always changing. Science, as a term, is usually defined as the use of evidence to construct testable explanations and predictions. Science deals with only the natural world and collects and organizes information by looking at connections and cause and effect. Science advances with change. Science aims for the best understanding. What is science? Science is an organized way of collecting and gathering and analyzing evidence about the natural world, not just a collection of facts. Goals of science: to provide natural explanations, understandings, and patterns, to make predictions. Also, scientific method: to use what you know and ask questions, test the idea again and again until the problem is solved. Observe, ask, hypothesis, experiment. Recommend you write that down. By the way, don't just trust this video. I'd recommend you do your own research and you read it on your own and you take your own notes. Again, like I said in the other video, I'm only 14. I'm only doing this because we're talking about how we're not learning properly in class and how the teacher's not teaching properly, and how that we were going to form a group, and I felt like this would be easier. We could also still form a group to, like get together during lunch and study science, but of course this will also be helpful. Observing and asking questions. Scientific investigations begin with observation. Recommend you write that down. The act of noticing and describing events or processes in a careful, orderly way. Of course, scientific observation involves more than just looking. The right kind of observation leads to asking questions no one has asked or answered before. Inferring and forming hypothesis. I wrote notes on this. After I read it, I'm going to give the notes that I wrote. After posing questions, scientists use further observations to make inferences. An inference is a logical interpretation. If you don't know the meaning of this, I recommend you write it down. An inference is a logical interpretation based on what science you already know. Inference combined with a creative imagination can lead to hypothesis. A hypothesis is a tentative scientific explanation that can be tested by further observation or by experimentation. Scientific hypotheses must be tested by gathering data, and that can either support or reject them, just like we do in the science fair. So basically the notes I wrote on this part is inference is a logical interpretation, just like a simple explanation of inference. Inference is a logical interpretation, and then I wrote some stuff on qualitative and quantitative data, what they are, theory versus hypothesis, and I'm going to get to those parts because we haven't got to those parts yet. Designing controlled experiments. Testing hypotheses often involves designing experiments that measure factors that can change. These changeable factors are called variables. Some possible variables include temperature, time, light, time, and availability of nutrients. Ideally, a hypothesis should be tested by an experiment in nutrients. Ideally, a hypothesis should be tested in an experiment which only one variable is changed. All the other variables should be kept unchanged or controlled. This is called a controlled experiment. Basically, what a controlled experiment is basically it is the same as the other experiment, but one variable is changed to see what happens. Again, do your own research. I'm only a student. I might be stupid too, so. Controlling variables. It is important to control variables because if several variables are changed, researchers can't easily tell which variable is responsible for any results. So that's why control variables are really important, and they change one at a time. Because if you change multiple at a time, then how are you going to know? It's like if you added many spices into your dish, and the dish comes out tasting like crap, and you're like, why does it taste like crap? You're going to want to take away one, and then be like, oh, this doesn't taste like crap anymore. Okay, it was this ingredient. But if you take away all of them at once, you're not going to know which ingredient made your soup taste like crap. Or your rice or whatever you were cooking. Okay. Researchers can't easily tell which variable is responsible for any results they observe. The variable deliberately changed, the one that is getting changed, write this down, is called the independent variable, the variable that is getting changed. The variable that is observed and that changes in response to the independent variable, this is the one that changes because of the independent variable. This one is called the dependent variable. Write this down. Control and experimental groups. Typically, experiments are divided into control and experimental groups. A control group is supposed to do the same conditions as the experimental group, except for changes in the independent variable. Scientists always try to reproduce or replicate their observations by setting up several control and experimental groups, rather than just a single pair. Basically, a control group is exposed to the same conditions as the experimental group, except for changes in the independent variable. Basically, they're simply changing the independent variable to see what's going to happen, just like I said before. This is simple. We already know this. Don't worry. Don't stress out. You know this. Collecting and analyzing data. Scientists often observe their experiments by gathering two main types of data. Quantitative data. Quantitative data is numbers and measurements. Quantitative, numbers and measurements. Write that down. I'm actually reading this from my notes. Write it down. Remember it. Stick it in your brain. Numbers obtained by counting or measuring. In the marsh grass experiment, which was on page 11, in the marsh grass experiment, quantitative data could include the number of plants per plot, the length, the width, the weight of each blade of grass, and so on. Qualitative data, I'm reading this from my notes, is the descriptions, the observations, okay? These are stuff you can't measure, but you can observe and you can describe. Qualitative data are descriptive and involve characteristics that cannot usually be measured. Qualitative data in the marsh grass experiment might include notes about whether the grass was growing upright or sideways, or whether one plot was disturbed by clam diggers. Next page. By the way, because these videos are getting too long, I do have to cut these apart. Lord. This is going to be part 2. I'm going to post part 3 too.